Hello. We probably better go ahead and get started. Okay. Let's open up in prayer. Father in heaven, as we come before you, we're just so thankful for your word. Once again, we're thankful for the teaching that we get to sit under. We're thankful just for the expression of your love that we get through your word and through the preaching that goes on. We're thankful, Lord, that we can have hope and that we know that we can have hope because of the work that's done in Christ Jesus. We're thankful that we have the sure knowledge that at some point all of this will end and Jesus Christ will return and take us to be with him, to be sons and daughters of an eternal God and to dwell with you eternally. And we just are grateful for that. We long for that. We look forward to it, and we pray that that would happen quickly. Until then, Father, we pray that you would strengthen us and encourage us so that we might live in order to glorify you here on the earth among those you've placed us among. We pray for this morning's lesson. We just ask that it would glorify you. Amen. Okay. Here's an interesting little tidbit just to sort of get the ball rolling. I had somebody email me. You know, we've been talking about how the law was made to make the Jews different, to make them stand out. The law was given to them for that, to make them holy, as it were. And somebody emailed me. Of all things, they were reading through Esther. And they emailed this to me. In Esther chapter 3, what's the guy's name? Haman is made to be the junior king or whatever they call him. He's second to the king, and he's very excited about it. He's very pleased with himself, and when he goes in and out, all of the princes and everything bow down to him, and he likes that very much. But there's a Jew named Mordecai that won't do it, and it upsets Haman. And so Haman concocts a plan. I'm sure you're all familiar with this story, right? But he goes to the king's Ahasuerus or something like that, and he says to him, he's gonna plot to have the Jews murdered, and so he goes to this king, and he says this to him in chapter 3, verse 8. He says, "Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus," I guess that's how you pronounce his name, "there is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom." And here's the kicker here. "Their laws are different from those of all other people, and they do not observe the king's laws. So it's not in the king's interest to let them remain." So here we are, I don't know how many years in the future, and we have this guy Haman telling the king that, you got these people and they follow these laws, and their laws are different than any other group of people, which is sort of the point that we've been trying to make here. I just thought that was an interesting little tidbit. Does anybody have any idea how far? I think this is in Assyrian captivity, so this would probably be 1,000 years or so. I don't know, but after the law was given, that we have this. Anyway, so last week we were working on the Ten Commandments. We got about halfway through, and I'd like to just briefly sort of finish up there, and then talk about a few more things. And again, next week we only have 1 week left, and I'd kind of like to reserve that to talk about at least a little bit about how the law, how Christians today might interact with the law, or what it might mean to them. And so I do want to go through that. So this will be our last week kind of in this section. But I just want to touch on some remaining laws of the or some of the remaining commandments here, and then move on just a little bit. So I think we ended up with thou shalt not, the Sabbath, right? We were talking about the Sabbath last time. And so the next, there we go. So when I look at what the Ten Commandments, I kind of break them up. The first four commandments seem to have, to me anyway, the idea of how the Jews were to relate to God, right? It's thou shalt not take my name in vain, have no other gods before me, make any idols, and then remember the Sabbath. And the next six then, to my way of thinking at least, are dealing with how the Jews are to relate to each other. Okay, and I had to add the fifth commandment there because you can't get a stone with 6 commandments on it. You just don't make them. So so we have honor thy father and mother. And then number 6, thou shalt not kill. Number 7, thou shalt not commit adultery. Number 8, thou shalt not steal. Number 9, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. And number 10, thou shalt not covet. Again, all things that have to do with dealing with people. What's interesting, I think, is that as we look at this, we would all look at these things and say that's, so I'm getting ahead of myself, I guess, a little bit. A lot of people break down the law, the Israeli or the Mosaic law into 3 different categories. You have and I'm not saying that this is necessarily right. I don't think it's wrong necessarily either, but I don't know that the Jews would break it down this way, but at any rate, you have what we call the moral law, which is the 10 Commandments, essentially. We have the civil law, which is the laws relating to how the Israelites were to function as a society. And then we have the, dang it, I should have written this down. The ceremonial law. Who said that? Thank you. The ceremonial law, which has to do with the offerings and all that stuff, right? So as we look at this, we can clearly see that these are moral laws here. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery. And I think we would all agree with them. These are good laws, right? They're moral, they're upright. But what I think is interesting is that, look, let's just consider our own law here in the United States. At least 2, maybe 3 of these laws don't exist in our country. Although I would say, I mean, by and large, our law here in the United States is meant to be moral, but they don't exist. And that would be the 5th one: honor thy father and mother. That's not a law in this country. Number 10, thou shalt not covet. That's not a law, right? And then I guess arguably, I don't think this is against the law per se. I mean, we'd all say it's immoral, but number 7, thou shalt not commit adultery. If that's against the law, that's never prosecuted that I know of in the United States, right? So can anybody think of why that would be? Why these aren't inculcated into law? Darren? I'm sorry?
Coveting, the 10th one, I think that's something that society is actually, the world is trying to propagate. You want
So it's not, yeah. But don't you think everybody would agree that it's immoral?
well, sure it is.
Yeah.
It is, but that's, underlying, that's what they're wanting you to feel.
Well, it's like Gary said, kind of goes along with what Gary in his advertising thing this morning, that, I mean, where would advertising be if we didn't covet, right? But I mean, why is this, we can't make this against the law in this country. Why is that? Okay, again, I have to say this every week, but I am deaf as a post. So you got to speak up. I cannot.
How would you prove that?
Exactly. That's not, I mean, it's an action, right? Coveting is an action, but you might be coveting now. I can't tell it. And I might be coveting now, and you can't tell it. That's not something that you can ascertain via the law, right? There's no way you can define that. I mean, I guess we could define it. We could, but it's kind of limited to ourselves, is it not? It's not a physical thing. It's a heart thing, right? And the same with honor thy father and mother. Okay, I think we could all agree what isn't honoring thy father and mother if we see it, right? If you have an individual who I don't know beats his mother, we could all agree that that's not honoring her, right? But there's short of that, who's to say? That's kind of an ambiguous thing. And the reason I'm pointing this out is because this is one of the things that sets the Mosaic law, the law of God, apart from the other laws, is that it deals in absolutes. It deals in rights and wrongs, and it deals in matters of attitude and in matters of the heart, where other laws, our law, any human law, can't do that. There's nothing, you can think, according to American law, you can think whatever you want to. Okay? Nobody can enforce a law that says you cannot think this way. Okay? You may not be able to say what you're thinking, but you can think, right? But in the biblical law, God's putting it right here in the first 10 commandments. You cannot do this. Don't do this. Don't be like that. And so I guess that's the one major thing I wanted to point out about these 10 commandments. We have the first 4 of them are kind of strange or different in that they deal exclusively with how the Jews were to relate to God. That was different. That was new. No other law does that. They don't have that kind of thing. And then even in the laws about how they're to relate to each other, there's moral certitudes in there that other laws don't have. Okay? All right, so moving on from the 10 Commandments then, I wanted to talk about this a little bit. This was brought up a couple of weeks ago, the idea of slavery. And so when you get through the 10 Commandments in Exodus 20 and move on to chapter 21, Moses starts giving out different laws for different things. He talks about a lot of different things there. We talked about those one week. So the 10 Commandments isn't the end of the law. But in chapter 21, in the very first section after the giving of the 10 Commandments, he starts talking about how to deal with slavery. And again, what I want to point out is God deals with people. He's dealing with the Jews. He deals with us in the context of the culture that we live in, right? And so he didn't call for the Jews to act according to the way we might act in our culture. He called them to act according to the way that their culture was set up in the culture of that world. And as I said, at that time, slavery served. It sounds kind of funny to say this, but slavery served a purpose. Again, it didn't have any social safety nets. So if you got so far into debt or life was so hard on you that you just couldn't afford, there was no other way out for you, you could always sell yourself into slavery. Okay? But to do so in Israel was to do so much differently than it would be in other countries. And I don't have time to research all the laws of the Hittites and the Jebusites and all that stuff. And I probably couldn't do it anyway. But so what I ended up doing was I've gathered this thing here. You can probably read it, but I'm going to read it to you. This is from something called the Anchor Bible Dictionary, and it's just 4 quotes about slavery in the Old Testament, in the Mosaic Law that set it apart from the other laws of slavery around it. So I'll read these to you here. The first one goes like this: we have in the Bible the first appeals in world literature to treat slaves as human beings for their own sake and not just for the interest of their masters. In contrast, too many ancient doctrines, the Hebrew law was relatively mild towards the slaves and recognized them as human beings subject to defense from intolerable acts although not to the same extent as free persons. So we have this guy saying here that, and I'm sure these are all written from a Christian perspective, but they have this guy, this historian saying that, the Bible treats slaves better, more betterer than the other surrounding laws do. Quote number 2 here, these dreadful laws, and he's specifically referring to the Code of Hammurabi here, are notable for the ferocity of their physical punishments, in contrast to the restraint of the Mosaic Code, and the enactments of Deuteronomy and Leviticus, which sprang from it. Number 3, consider the centrality of property offenses in the law of Hammurabi. Despite the fact that the laws in the Book of the Covenant, which are the Mosaic laws, are very similar to these laws, they clearly regard crimes against the person as far more serious than property offenses. Okay, so what this guy's saying is that in these other cultures, in these other places, there are laws that dealt with slaves and things like that where they were purely financial. They purely had to do with the finances of things. So you couldn't do certain things. If you killed somebody else's slave or something like that, you were liable for the economic damages that you caused, but not for the loss of life. Does that make sense to you? But that was not the case in the law of Israel. The law of Israel put the human life above the property value. And then finally, 3 Old Testament civil laws are quite unparalleled in any other ancient Near Eastern code. Exodus 21:20 through 21 and 21:26 through 27 take up the case of slaves injured or killed by their own masters, and Deuteronomy 23:15 through 16 grants asylum to runaway slaves. No other ancient Near Eastern law has been found that holds a master to account for the treatment of his own slaves as distinct from the injury done to the slave of another master. And the otherwise universal law regarding runaway slaves was that they must be sent back with severe penalties for those who failed to comply. So the reason I wanted to put this is just another example here. The law that God gave to the Israelites, while it included things that we would find abhorrent today in our culture, that were commonplace in the culture of that time and served a purpose in the culture of the time. Even in those things, we see that the law of God is different than the laws of the nations surrounding it, that human life and dignity is regarded more highly. Okay? The next set, also found in verse 21. Oh, that's disappointing. Sweet. I hear you laughing. Someday I will become a PowerPoint genius and you'll be sorry. Okay, let's try this. There we go. What if I go back to here? See? Yeah. The ox laws, also found in chapter 21. I named them that. I don't think that the Jews called them the ox laws, but so this is kind of interesting about these laws, right? The laws. Let me just read them to you here. It won't take long. Starting in verse 28 of chapter 21, if an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox shall surely be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall go unpunished. Okay? If, however, an ox was previously in the habit of goring, and its owner has been warned, yet he does not confine it, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner shall also be put to death. If a ransom is demanded of him, then he shall give for the redemption of his life whatever is demanded of him. Whether it gores a son or a daughter, it shall be done according to him the same rule. If the ox gores a male or female slave, the owner shall give his or her master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. Okay? So there was other ox laws. The Jews weren't the only ones that had ox laws, right? And I just like saying ox laws. I don't know why. And so here's a little chart of the surrounding ox laws. Now, don't pay attention to the top line there. Well, okay, never mind. The Code of Hammurabi. This is what it says about an ox. If an ox, while it is walking along the street, gored a seigneur to death. A seigneur is like an average person, somebody who's not a slave, but somebody who's not royalty either. That case is not subject to claim. So if you're walking along, right, and some ox is walking along with you and just decides to gore you, if it's my ox, right, it's just your bad luck. Sorry. You know, it's just too bad. You shouldn't have been there. Wrong time, wrong place. However, if the seigneurs, if whatever this word is, if his ox was a gorer and the city council had made it known to him that it was a gorer, but he did not pat its horns or tie up his ox, and that ox gored to death a member of the aristocracy, he shall give 1/2 mina of silver. I don't know how much that is, but you can see here that the life that was taken isn't the issue, right? I don't know who you have to give the mina of silver to, but there's a financial penalty to be paid, but there's no responsibility for the life. If it was a slave, he has to give 1/3 of a mina of silver. So a little bit of a discount there if your ox gores a slave. Okay? So this code of Eshnuna, if an ox is known to gore habitually and the authorities have brought the fact to the knowledge of its owner, but he does not have his ox dehorned, it gores a man and causes his death, then the owner of the ox shall pay 2/3 of the mina of silver. If it gores a slave and causes his death, he shall pay 15 shekels. If it gores another ox and causes its death, both the ox owners shall divide among themselves the price of the live ox and also the meat of the dead ox. Okay? So I don't know if you caught it, but the difference here in the Mosaic, so here we have basically 3 laws dealing with the same exact thing. Both of the laws of the Hammurabi and the Eshnuna codes deal specifically and only with the economic damage done. But if you notice, in the Mosaic Law, if the ox gores somebody, what happens? If it kills them. The ox is killed. The ox loses its life. Okay, maybe not a big deal to you, but still, there's a penalty paid, life for life, right? So the ox is not allowed to continue on. So there is some value placed on the life. Okay? And on top of that, it cannot be eaten. So the owner loses the value of the ox for his carelessness. But he himself is not punished. But if he's been warned about it, okay, and it does it, then his life is forfeit. So in the Jewish law, there's no penalty, there's no money to be paid here. If you have an ox that's known to gore and it gores somebody and kills them, your life is forfeit. Okay? Now, there is a provision here in verse 30. If a ransom is demanded of him, so I guess if the family gets together and decides, you know what, we didn't really care for Bob so much anyway, but here's an opportunity to make some money, so you owe us a certain amount. It says that he shall give for the redemption of his life whatever is demanded of him. So whatever the price is, if he wants to save his life, he can pay the ransom, but he doesn't get to set it. I mean, it's not set by law. It is what the people who suffered the loss of life do. And then it's less for a slave, 30 shekels of silver, and the ox still gets stoned. Okay, and then nobody gets to keep the meat, even if it hurts another ox. They divide its price equally, and that's the end of it. So you see, I guess what I'm trying to show you is that the value of human life in the Mosaic Law is much different than it is in the surrounding cultures. And so that's one of the primary differences of the Mosaic Law as opposed to other cultures. Okay, so just to summarize then, here's another little chart for you. In the Mosaic, so we have this. I don't know if you can read this, but in the just like our law in the United States, the laws of the other cultures of that time were limited to civil law. They didn't have anything to do with what was moral and what was immoral or anything like that. It was just civil law. How are we going to operate as a society? The Mosaic Law, however, had moral precepts and religious practices were built right into the law. Okay? In some senses, I think as Americans, we would kind of chafe, under the idea of, the freedom of religion and all that stuff. We're free to practice our religion the way we want to. That wasn't the true with the Mosaic Law. You had to do it exactly according to the law. So I think, we would chafe a little bit under some of these laws ourselves. Anyway, so the formulation, of the laws around them were only, I don't even know how to say this word, casuistic. Okay? I looked up, just so you know, I'm not a complete, I'm just not winging this completely. I looked up casuistic. I should have put a screen up here. Under the definition of casuistic, this is definition number 1, of or relating to casuist or casuistry. That's very helpful. Number 2, of or pertaining to casuist or casuistry. And number 3, relating to casuistry. Attempts to solve moral dilemmas by applying general rules. I still don't have any idea what that means. But I think what it's trying to say is that it's the same way we use what we call case law, is we take a law, something that's been put in place, and we extract out of that certain principles, and then we apply that to other situations as well. I think that's what they're saying. So that's the formulation there. And so the law in the culture around that weren't Israelites was only casuistic. And then in Israel, the law was casuistic and apodictic. Is there anybody in here who's heard this word before? Isn't that crazy? So I did look up apodictic too. That's a little bit easier to understand. Necessarily or demonstrably true, incontrovertible. That's about it. So I think the point that they're trying to make is that the Jewish law dealt with absolutes. I don't know if this is making any sense to you, but it's in the chart, so I kind of had to read it. Sometimes accompanied by motivational reasons. Okay, the context in the cultures around, at least the laws that we have, the codes that we have that list the laws, they're just a straight list of laws. Here's the laws. Boom. Okay, this code of Hammurabi was I don't know what you call it, but it's a great big stone that had all the laws printed on it. They think their theory is that this guy Hammurabi set this up in a predominant city or possibly cities where people could go by, and if they could read the law or have somebody else read it to them. And so there it was, just a straight list of laws. But in the Bible, you have both a distinct list of laws, and then the laws are embedded in narrative text. Punishments, life and property can be equated. Social stratification, vicarious punishments. And so what they're saying here is that life and property had the same value. There was no distinction between, you killed somebody, that was bad, morally wrong, so we're going to do this to you, but it wasn't about that. It was just the financial value of it all. Okay? Social stratification, we do see a little bit of that in the biblical law, but in the cultural law around that, social stratification was very evident. There were, certain layers of socioeconomic people were valued more highly than others. Okay, and then vicarious punishment, that simply means that somebody else can be punished in your place. So for instance, if I do something negligent and I kill your child somehow, run over him with my car or something like that, that instead of me paying the penalty, that my child can be taken and killed for that, child for a child. So the child is the one that, does that make sense to you? That's what vicarious punishment is. So in the Mosaic Law, life and property are not commensurate. There's a difference. There's fewer social distinctions, and there's no vicarious punishment. The purposes of this are in the cultural things: preservation of justice and law and order, compensation and restoration of society, and are the guiding principles. So that's not bad. Okay, that's what we have here in America. You need that. If you're going to have a country, if you're going to have a culture, if you're going to have a society, you have to have some sort of system that irons all this out for you. So there's nothing wrong with that, but that's as far as it went. But in the Mosaic Law, we have absolutes. We have right and wrong that are absolutely right and wrong. Morality is outlined, and punishment is not just for restitution, but also retribution for the actual wrongdoing. Okay, so it's the idea. The idea in these other laws is that you did something and it was wrong. We don't care that you did it, that you were wrong, but we care that you defrauded something and made our society less workable, and so you have to compensate for that. But in the law of God, you paid a penalty just for being wrong, for sinning, essentially. Okay, so that's the differences of the law in a nutshell. I wish we had more time to kind of flesh that out, but we're way behind here. So I just wanted to. It looks like it's going to be more briefly than I had planned, but I wanted to briefly go through the law in worship. Because there's no, the Jews are the only ones who do this. There's no, at least that we found anyway, there's nothing in our current situation that would equate to this. You can worship any way you want to. You can worship any God you want to, but that was not true of the Jews, right? So they had a system that basically told them how they could worship and when they could worship. And what to do in that. And the timing of that worship, they had the Day of Atonement, of course. You had a lot of laws surrounding that. You had 3 feasts, 3 holy feasts in the year that had to be observed. There was a lot of laws around that. And then you had daily sacrifices. There was a morning and evening daily sacrifice that had to be observed. This was as a nation that the Jews had to do this. But on top of that then, the laity could come in and worship at their leisure, I guess, anytime they wanted. They could come in and essentially meet with God. Remember, God dwells here in the tabernacle in the middle of the encampment. And so if you are an ordinary Jewish person, you can come in and meet with God, if you will, and worship Him as a private ceremony. Okay, why would you do that? Well, there's several things that are outlined, and to do it, you might want to do that. And that this involves a sacrifice, obviously, when you do this. You would do this if you had been ritually unclean for any length of time. This was required of you. Like if childbirth, or you touched something dead, or you had leprosy of some sort, or skin disease of some sort. It would require that you come in and offer sacrifices. But also, if you wanted to if you were having a celebration, some kind of celebration, and you wanted to, your heart was just overflowing with joy or gratitude or whatever, you could come in and offer sacrifices to God. If you were fulfilling a vow, you could come in. You had to come in and offer sacrifices to God. If you wanted to petition God. If you just wanted to pray for something, asking God for, good crop or more kids or whatever, you could come in and offer sacrifices to God. So there were many, many reasons why you might do this. Okay, so the first 3 things I want to briefly talk to you about are there's 3 different types of offerings that are said to produce a soothing aroma to God. These are the burnt offerings, the cereal offerings, and the peace offerings. These are found in the book of Leviticus in the first 3 chapters. Okay, chapter 1 is burnt offering, chapter 2 is cereal offering, chapter 3 is peace offering. The first of them, the burnt offering, is by far and away the most common, and we've seen that before, right? Noah offered a burnt offering right after he got off the ark. Abraham's offered burnt offerings. I think Isaac and Jacob both offered burnt offerings. Job, if you remember, offered burnt offerings for his children. Okay, this is the most common type of offering that there is. It's also apparently the most important. It's done nationally every morning and every evening by the priest of Israel. They offer a burnt offering on behalf of the nation, but it could also be offered privately. Okay, the sacrifice itself had to be a perfect male specimen. Okay, and it could be a bull or a lamb or something like that. It could not be a goat. There were some animals that it couldn't be. And if a bird was offered, I think the sex of it wasn't so important. But if it was a mammal of some sort that fit within the category, it had to be a perfect specimen. Now remember, in the culture here, this is an agricultural culture. I don't know if you've been to the fair, but you've seen what perfect specimens go for at the fair, right? Okay, they're expensive. So that's the whole idea behind this burnt offering, is it cost you something. You couldn't go hunting and kill a deer or whatever they had over there and use it as a sacrifice. You couldn't do that because that didn't cost you anything. You couldn't offer anything to you that had been that was a result of a battle or something that you had acquired for nothing. Okay, you couldn't offer that as a burnt offering. It had to be something that cost you, that was dear to you. Okay, and these animals would have been considered very valuable. So what happens is the animal's brought into the tent. Oh man, we're not going to make it. So I'll skip. So here's the interesting thing about a burnt offering. The burnt offering is given, so it's killed in such a way, it's killed by the worshiper. We have this idea of the priest doing all this, but the priest only did that for national offerings. If you're bringing in your burnt offering, you got to kill it, you got to skin it, you got to cut it up into pieces, right? Once you get done with that, then the priest starts putting it on the altar. In the meantime, the priest catches everything, the blood, in a bowl of some sort, and he sprinkles it just on the altar there and throws the rest of it away. Okay? So and then the whole thing is burnt up except for the skin. There's nothing left over. So why would we do that? What's the purpose? What did this accomplish? So here again, we're in trouble because what we're given in Leviticus and Deuteronomy and places like that is a recipe for how to do it. But it appears that it was either so common or for some reason or other, we're never given the why, essentially, of doing it. Okay? And so we have to speculate. Because we weren't there, we don't know. This was 3,500 years ago. We don't know what exactly was going on. But here's an interesting thing. In verses 3 and 4 of Leviticus 1, God says to Moses, in terms of bringing the offering, he says, I think in verse 3, he says he has to bring not blameless, but a male without blemish, that he, the offerer, may be accepted before God. And then in verse 4, he turns right around and he says he has to do the same thing so that it will be accepted and he, the worshiper, will be atoned for. Okay? So the word atonement, or that word that means atonement, in the Old Testament has two different meanings. The first meaning is to wipe clean. The second is to pay a ransom for. We're not going to get to it today, but if we were to go through the purification sacrifice, we would see that is to cleanse, apparently to cleanse the temple of the taint of sin. And when that animal is sacrificed, the blood is taken and wiped on various parts. That's different from this, where it's just sprinkled on the base of the altar and then thrown away, right? So the blood is actually used in the purification sacrifice, but it's not used here. And so that leads us to think that this is not the wiped clean use of the word atonement, but the ransom use of atonement. Now remember when we talked about the ox, okay, that word ransom's a little bit different than what we're talking about, than what we're used to here. The ransom for them was you paid this thing so that you didn't suffer you could pay a less high penalty. Is that? I'm not phrasing this right, but so remember the ox thing, okay? If your ox was guilty of goring somebody before and you didn't do anything about it and it gored somebody else, you were going to die. But you could pay whatever ransom they demanded and you wouldn't You wouldn't die. You would not have to pay that ultimate penalty. And so it's the kind of the same thing here going on before God. I see this in my own mind as sort of the equivalent of, I don't want to say the equivalent, but like a metaphor for repentance. The person that offers this burnt sacrifice is going to God, and he's agreeing with God that he owes something that he cannot pay. He's agreeing that he is guilty before God, and that there is a severe penalty to be paid for whatever he's guilty of, right? And that he's offering this bull, this animal, as a ransom. That's why it had to be, remember, it had to be valuable, as a ransom to God for his own life. Okay? It's not wiping the slate clean, okay, but it's a ransom. I don't know if I'm making this clear, but that's the best I can do in the time that we have. And so it's kind of like, he's saying, I agree with you, God, and I want to wipe the slate, or I want to say that. I want to make things right between us, but I know that I owe you something that I can't pay. So here's a ransom. I'm gonna give you this instead, so that the penalty for me is lower, or it's not my own life. Okay, he can be reconciled to God for less than the cost of his own life. Okay, so cereal offering. I have no idea why you'd want to offer a cereal offering. No, just kidding. Okay. The word here for cereal offering is mina. Okay, where have we heard that before? That was the same word that we got from Cain and Abel. We've heard it a few other times as well. The cereal offering, I know I'm going fast, bear with me, is in my opinion, as you go through here and look at this is simply, it's kind of like a tithe. It's an offering that you give out of, it's a tribute. Okay, you give a tribute to somebody who is higher, more superior than you. So you give this grain offering, this cereal offering to the Lord to acknowledge your position of submission, I guess, to Him, and also your dependence. You give it as a way of saying, I admit my dependence upon you. Here's what I have. I'm bringing this to you. And giving it to you as a reflection of what you've done for me, of my gratitude for you. Okay? This offering, it could be given, it could be raw, or it could be just, raw or cooked, but whatever it was, the priest got a little piece of this offering. Actually, he got most of it, he got about 90%. 10% went into the fire, 90% went to the priest. This was the primary sustenance of the priesthood. Then there's the peace offering. How are we doing? Are we out? Yeah, we're out. So there's a peace offering. The peace offering is just an offering. I don't want to say just an offering. It's the same sort of process as the burnt offering, except that now you can offer female animals. The peace in those days meant not just the lack of hostility or absence of war, but it was the idea of material blessing, of good health, of all that kind of stuff. And so you could bring a peace offering. When you brought the peace offering, you killed the animal, you separated it all out, but then some of all the fat, the good fat, and the parts of the liver went on the fire. The priest got the breast and the right thigh of the animal, and then you took the rest of it. This is the only one that you get to take part in, right? You take the rest of it, you get your friends and your family together, and you have a meal. It has to be eaten in one day. Okay, so, this is a celebration, right? It's a celebration. It's for many different reasons. You might offer this peace offering. Maybe you had a child, or you've fulfilled a vow and you're grateful for it, or you're just grateful to God for a good year or whatever. I don't know, but you give this peace offering, and you bring your family and your friends in, sort of like, I don't know, Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner, right? You do this offering. Okay, 2 more offerings. The Purification Offering, I talked a little bit about that already. It's also known as the Sin Offering. This offering, again, they take the blood. This is kind of the same as everything else, but they take the blood and they smear the blood on different things in order to cleanse things. It's kind of interesting, on the Day of Atonement, the blood had to go all the way into the Holy of Holies and got sprinkled on the mercy seat. Okay? If On any other day, if a priest was offering, then he would go not into the Holy of Holies, but into the holy place and sprinkle blood on the curtain. So that, according to the rank of the person was where it had to get cleansed. If a regular person came in and offered this thing of purification, which you would have to do if you had, again, been ritually unclean for any period of time or anything like that, then it was just the horns of the altar that got smeared with blood. But it seems to have this idea, this connotation of God is living with the people. God cannot tolerate sin. Any sin taints where he's living. And so that has to be cleansed. Okay, that's the, and we don't, again, let me finish up. The last one is the reparation offering. That's given if you have inadvertently sinned against God, or the only outright blatant sin that this can be offered for is when you have taken God's name in vain in some way. If you have sworn falsely against somebody's come and accuse you of something and you've sworn on God's name falsely, okay, you can give a reparation offering. You have to restore what you stole, but you can give a reparation offering to the Lord and be absolved of your guilt of mistreating his name. Okay, I know that's fast, but those are the 5 big sacrifices in Israel. And again, I want to emphasize, this was a complex system. Okay, we don't fully understand it, and we try to kind of take this stuff and move it directly over to where we are, and we just can't do that. We don't understand everything that was involved here in all of this stuff, but we know. I mean, I'm just trying to. I think on the second or third week we were talking about Elijah and the 450 prophets of Baal. Remember when they were trying to get the fire to come down, how they danced around and cut themselves and screamed and hollered and tried to wake Baal up and all that kind of stuff? Okay, you just think about that kind of worship. Okay, and then think about this, how this is very detailed. I'm not giving you half of what the details are in here. That goes on for chapters of the details of how these things are supposed to be offered for certain different types of people and things like that. And it's very, very controlled. And it's very, very organized. And it's, I think, probably very, very different than what went on around in the worship services of the culture around that. Do I know that for a fact? No, I can't say that for a fact. But I mean, when you see what is hinted at in some of the, and we see when the Israelis, when Moses was up on the mountain and they wanted to worship that calf, there was not an organized system that they presented there, right? Okay, it was basically an orgy, is what they were doing. So this we see in the law of God, even in the law of how to worship, a distinct difference between the law of God and the law of the cultures around. I'm sorry I kept you late. If I do it again, it'll maybe one more time. So thank you, and I'll see you next week.